So to Martin. Martin is the founder and CEO of Trans2 Performance, and following military service and senior sales and leadership roles, he founded Trans2 Performance. Martin recently published his book, I Am Human, 30 Mistakes to Success. What a great title, Martin. And today, Martin will be speaking about understanding the human element of change. Over to you, Martin.
Thanks, Julia. And I'm assuming you can hear me okay. I'm just going to start off by sharing my screen and getting my slides up just in preparation. Because obviously when I start my talk, I'll flip to the slide deck and we'll get stuck into it. But thank you for that introduction. It's an absolute pleasure to be invited here to speak at HPMA 2020. I've done a lot of work over the last few years in the healthcare sector with the NHS organisations and other healthcare organisations as well. So it's a wonderful opportunity for me to come and spread the message and deliver hopefully some impact for you guys today. I was asked to speak about embracing change in 2021 and what is it about change that we humans don't tend to deal with very well. Why don't we generally deal with change well, and what are the challenges it poses, and some practical tips around how we can overcome it. So I'm going to spend the next 50 minutes with you. What I would ask is come with me and bear with me. I think you'll take as much value from this in your personal life as you will your professional career. And hopefully I can send you away throughout December and as we approach 2021 with a really positive mindset around embracing the challenges that we face right now and some personal techniques and coping mechanisms that we can apply in 2021. So as Julia said, I released a book recently. I am Hull born and bred. I am a Yorkshireman, as you can tell by my accent. I joined the military. So I served in South America and the Falklands, the Far East, the Mediterranean. I had a wonderful time, grew up a lot. Since then, I've spent the last 15 years in business. I worked for a global consultancy called Gartner out in Stamford in New York, where I really sort of cut my teeth in the consulting industry. And since then, I came back to Yorkshire 5 years ago. I set up Trans2 Performance, or T2, the People Performance People, as we are known as. And it's been a wonderful journey. We get to work with the corporate sector, the public sector, in professional sport, with the military, because everything we do, we underpin with human performance, the psychology element of performance. What I'm going to try and do today is lift the lid on that psychology in regards to change and personal resilience going forward. So as I say, take notes. If you want to put any comments in the chat section, you can. We do have a booth, a T2 booth, which Claire from our organisation will be manning. So if you want to check in there and register your interest or ask any questions after the talk, please do. And I do believe there might be an opportunity for Q&A at the end. So let's get started. Let me share my slide deck. I'm not going to see anything or anybody, but I'm going to just look at the screen. I'm going to deliver as if the 300 people was in the audience in front of me. So as I say, come with me and bear with me. So embracing change in 2021, where I'd like to start by lifting the lid on why humans typically don't respond well to change. And we don't. That is a fair, sweeping statement. What we know from performance-based psychology and from neuroscience is that we don't really deal with change well. Change doesn't sit right with us for some certain reasons. So I'm going to start with the understanding, the education around that, tell you a few stories around that, and then we'll transition into what can we do about it. Now, for anybody on the session who has read the book, The Chimp Paradox by Dr. Steve Peters, you will probably be smiling now because you will acknowledge what I'm about to introduce to you. For anybody who's seen me speak before, you know that I'm a huge ambassador of getting people to understand how their brain works. If you haven't read the book, the one thing you can do following this talk is order the book, The Chimp Paradox, on Amazon, after you've ordered my book, of course. But order the book, The Chimp Paradox, on Amazon, and it will give you more of a flavor. But let me reveal why this is so important to understand in the context of dealing with pressure and change. Steve Peters is a neuroscientist. He strapped 350,000 people up to brain scanners over a 15-year period, and they were watching where the blood was flowing to the brain. Every single time we humans are faced with a decision, a situation, a change in environment, whether we meet people for the first time, whether we have to deal with conflict, whether we experience nice experiences, we humans have a certain mechanism in our brain that interacts every single time we did it. And what he was doing was testing to see how it works. He even did one experiment where he got 10 random people to walk in a room. You had to sit there with the 2 buttons, like or dislike, and you had to define whether you liked that person or not in 10 seconds without even saying anything. And every single person could decide whether they liked that person or not. He was showing us nice pictures, not very nice images, and asking us to make on-the-spot decisions, putting us under pressure. And what they found over this comprehensive study was this: the same 3 parts of our brain light up and interact every time we humans are faced with a situation, or we have to make a decision, or we meet people for the first time, or we're interacting. The first part of the brain they discovered on the scanner sits behind your forehead here. It's called your frontal lobe, or your prefrontal cortex in psychology, in neuroscience. However, he calls it in his book, The Human. Now, the reason this is our human brain is because it's responsible for logic, facts, and rationale. It is our CEO. It is the one part of our brain that makes us top of the food chain in 2020. As Homo sapiens, we went from foraging the earth to discovering fire, to cooking our food, to building tools, to hunting, to farming. The rest is history. Because we have a frontal lobe with more neurons than any other species on earth. It makes us human. It is a sensible, logical brain that can problem solve and innovate, and it will try to guide us in the right path through logic, facts, and rationale. However, the second part of the brain he talks about is this rugby ball shaped part of the brain you can see right in the center of the brain. It's called your limbic system. He calls it your chimp, because unlike your human brain, your chimp doesn't deal in logic, facts, or rationale. It doesn't give a shit, right? It just doesn't. Your limbic system, your chimp brain, acts on feelings and emotions only. It is your gut instinct. It is wired to flood your brain with chemicals or neurotransmitters that make us feel or act in a certain way based on emotion. So it's a complete opposite functioning part of your brain to the human. And the final part of the brain he talks about for this purpose, this very quick intro, is this. It sits behind your crown here. It's the yellow part on this image, and it's called your parietal lobe, or as he calls it, your computer, your brain's PC. And simply put, this part of your brain stores your memories and experiences as you go through life. So here's the analogy. Here's what they found. In every situation that we humans face, whether it's COVID-19, whether it's the winter period in a hospital, whether it's crucial decisions you're making in your personal life, whether it's meeting people for the first time, the same 3 parts of the brain light up, they interact. Your human and your chimp scan the horizon. They both give you some input, one based on logic, fact, and rationale, and one based on your feelings or emotions about the situation. You choose to act. However you choose to act, you will store it in your parietal lobe as a memory to pull upon at a later stage. So the older you get, the wiser you get, right? Yeah, unless you've been putting a lot of crap in there for the last 20 years, of course. However, that's not really important. What's important is the big reveal of the book, the big revelation. So don't buy it, just buy mine now, which we can pass a link on, right? Here's the big reveal of the book. Your chimp, your limbic system brain that they found under this testing, is 5 times quicker to respond than your human brain. 5 times quicker, in and around 10 seconds. I think the average was 7.8 seconds to fire up, and your chimp brain will give you a conclusion in or out, like, dislike, friend or foe. It's that quick. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever met anybody for the first time and you just don't like them? Yeah? Don't say today, please. But you get my point. You just don't like them. My wife has a saying, there's something about them. And she says, I'll be right. And she always is, which is really frustrating. But it's because your chimp brain is firing up, and in 10 seconds, it has to decide friend or foe, in or out, like, dislike. Your human brain, the frontal lobe, the most logical part of your brain, is a whole minute and a half behind before it even enters the equation. And even then, it's got to go on the mission of discovery to find any evidence. By then, usually your chimp brain has decided. You know, you all did this on me just 5 minutes ago as Julia introduced me. My camera went on. Some of you saw me for the first time, how I dress, how I look, how I speak, my tone, my volume. And you decided one of 2 things straight away on this call. He's all right. This is going to be a great start to the day. fingers crossed. Or number two, oh, for God's sake, he's full of himself. Same shit, different speaker, right? Now, I hope it wasn't number two, but if it was number two, I'm not precious. It's fine, because our brain has to do this. It has to decide whether this is good for us or not, whether we are at risk or not. Your human brain doesn't really enter the fray till a bit later. So the first thing we've got to understand about human behavior is that we are animals. We are emotional beasts built to basically fulfill three certain functions. And the three basic functions of human existence is this. Number one, we have to survive as a species. And that is why our emotional limbic system brain has to be quicker than your logical brain. It's why your chimp is in charge. Because number one innate function of any species on Earth, right, through evolution, is survival. We still have to survive. Millions of years ago, we had to be able to go run as a saber-toothed tiger. Don't eat those berries. Don't walk off the edge of a cliff. We had to be able to do that. Well, you fast forward to today in 2020. And maybe I am speaking to the wrong audience today to say this, but I usually say at this point, how many life or death situations have you actually been in? Probably the wrong audience, right? But you get my point. No longer do we run from saber-toothed tigers. No longer is a daily episode a case of survival, right? So how does survival manifest in the modern day world? Well, it manifests in us protecting our teams, our egos, our opinions, our families. It manifests when someone puts on Facebook a certain comment and you think it's aimed at you. It manifests when someone sends you that email, right? Someone sends you the email, firing a bullet at you or your team, and CCs the boss in. And you read that email, your chimp comes out in... So I believe we are back now. Sorry about that. I think we had a technical issue. I was in full flow and someone ran in and said the broadcast has gone off. But I've just spoken with Rachel and I believe we are back live now. So sorry for that brief interruption. Now, I think I was on this slide, which was talking around, after the introducing the chimp, I was talking around the three basic human functions. So I don't quite know where it went off, but I'll jump straight back into that and pick it up. So let me just share the slide deck again. So as I was saying, we have three basic human functions: survival, reproduction, and purpose. So survival, I hope you heard this, but I was talking about, I may be speaking to the wrong audience when I say that. How many actual life or death situations do you have these days? And I'm sure in your industry, you're a lot closer to it than most. However, in the modern day, we don't really run from saber-toothed tigers anymore. Or, you know, every day is not a life or death situation. So how does survival manifest? I don't know if you heard this before we went off broadcast, but I'll share it again. It manifests with us protecting our egos, our teams, our ideas, our tribe. It manifests when we think someone's having a go at us, when we think we're under threat, when someone sends you an email and CCs the boss in. And I was telling the story around they CC the boss in, they fire a bullet at you or your department, and your chimp instantly comes out. And your chimp comes out because it wants to protect you. And you read the first two lines of that email and you think, right, you're having it both barrels. You CC the world in, and before we know it, we've got World War III on email because your chimp fires an emotionally fueled response to protect you at all costs. You hit send, you go make your brew, you come back, and I said, if you're like me, you always read your sent items back just to see how good it was, right? And when you get halfway down, your logical brain, the frontal lobe I was introducing you to, starts to intervene and say, whoa, but it's too late. We've already responded, right? Because if your human could just enter the fray for 1 second, it might say, listen, you know this person. What's the reason behind the email? Go and have a cup of tea with them. Let's find out what's behind this. That's the way your rational, logical brain, you know, will operate. You do this in your personal life. You know, survival happens in your personal life as well. We get very territorial. I tell you what gets my chimp out, the guy who parks his car outside my house, and I hate it. I absolutely hate it. You know, I turn the corner of my street and I think he's going to be there again. And my chimp starts having an inner dialogue with me. I see his car outside my house, and this is my dialogue. Look, he's parked outside your house again. You've paid a lot of money for this house. Where are your visitors going to park? I don't even get visitors. But I'm trying to justify why my emotional response is happening. Go knock on his door. Go tell him to move it, right? And before you know, the situation escalates. The human brain is a really interesting thing, but we are an animal when you strip us back, and survival is the #1 reason why your chimp brain is faster than your logical brain. If you think about that in the context of the world right now, If you think about survival is our number one innate function, we have had Brexit, we have had political situations, we have had Black Lives Matter, we have had COVID, and these things are polarizing society. So we feel like our chimps are in overdrive at the minute because there's threat and danger everywhere. You add that to the work that you guys do in the industry that you do, right? And things you have to continue, right? You can see that more often than not over the last 6 months, you've probably had an overactive chimp that's trying to protect you at all costs because survival is your number one innate function. The chimp's not all bad. The second function is reproduction. So we're like any other animal. We've got to find a mate and reproduce. So it's responsible for our desires and attractions. And finally, purpose. And I'm not going to labor too much on this because I want to keep it moving. But I know that I'm speaking to an audience today who I admire greatly. Having served myself in the military, whenever I get to work with people who serve the public in the public sector, whether it's fire service, police force, healthcare workers, you know, I know that I don't have to talk to you about purpose. Let's face it, you're not overly in it for the money, right? And I mean that sincerely. Purpose is a really key part of brain function. When our chimp feels like it has purpose at an individual level, when we feel like we get up and contribute to society in some way, or we have a role or a sense of belonging. For some of us, it's our career. For some of us, it's our family, hobbies, maybe a mixture. But when we are pretty much, if you look at these three basic functions, when we are not under threat and we are surviving, when our tribe around us are safe, and when we feel like we have purpose at an individual level, we are one hell of a motivated and productive human being. And all I want you to do at this first salient point before I move on to the next bit is this. We have to understand the chimp model. We have to understand how our brain works. We will always be in survival mode first and foremost. Things right now are triggering that response in us more than ever, that emotional response, those brain chemicals, that cortisol flooding the brain, which gives us our fight or flight. Acknowledge it and be aware, and just know that it doesn't have to be fight or flight. It doesn't have to be that extreme. It can be freeze. And just know that when we freeze, when we count to 10, we always knew it was a good idea, well, we never knew why, well, we do now. When we freeze, it gives us an opportunity to engage our frontal lobe and think rationally and more logically about a situation. And finally, purpose. Just remember when the going gets tough and when you're at times, you know, when you feel overwhelmed, remember your purpose, because what you do is wonderful and it serves a great purpose. So moving it on. The chimp response can be the difference between developing what we call in performance psychology, a challenge or a threat state mindset. We work with two in particular fabulous NHS trusts at the minute, and I'm going to mention them. I hope they don't mind. We work with Hull University Teaching Hospitals with Simon Nerney and the team here in Hull, and we also work with Heather Barnett and the Mid Cheshire Hospitals Trust. They know what I'm talking about when I'm trying to work with them on developing a challenge state organization, because there is a difference between a challenge and a threat state mindset in individuals, but there is certainly a difference in challenge and threat state cultures. And I believe in the healthcare sector, we have to develop a challenge state mindset. So what do I mean by this? A challenge state driven by that chimp response and driven by the way our brain functions under pressurized situations. A challenge state mindset is when those people are aware of consequence, they have a healthy awareness of repercussions and failure and what might go wrong, but they are 100% focused on the positive achievement of a task at hand. It's like where your adrenaline builds, you feel under pressure, you feel slightly pushed out your comfort zone, but you remain focused on what you want to achieve and what you control. This is known in performance psychology as the challenge state. I work with sports teams, sportsmen and women. The most productive and successful sports teams, men and women, are challenge state. They are aware of pressure. They are aware of the 50,000 fans that are watching them. They are aware of all of this, but they remain focused on what they control and what they want to achieve. What we see shift in mindset, if the chimp becomes overactive and we flood our brains with cortisol and we become too much in survival mode, we see human beings go into what we call a threat state mindset. This is where they become overly focused on the consequence of what might happen of failing a task, or the repercussions or the consequences, which far outweighs any focus on achievement. Let me give you an example. Now, I know I'm always risky when I challenge people on this, but I've stood up at many NHS and healthcare conferences and I've challenged this. You have a thing called the never event in hospitals. which says you must never do this, ever, and it delivers the impact it desires. However, let me tell you something about language communication and the ability to put people in a challenge or a threat state. When we communicate to other human beings that they must never do something, guess what happens? They almost always do it. It's like when you say to your kids, don't do this, you can't do that, you must never go in that cupboard. You know, they almost always do it, because when human beings overly focus on avoidance and not messing up, we generally mess up. Because what happens in a threat state is our brain floods with the chemical cortisol, the neurotransmitter cortisol. Cortisol raises our heart rate. It increases it gives us tunnel vision. It reduces our fine motor skills, because it's designed for us to have all eyes on a threat with adrenaline at any one time. It's designed for fight or flight. So when we release too much cortisol because we're trying to avoid consequence, our skills and abilities reduce. So as hard as we try, we cannot perform. We want people in a challenge state, be aware of repercussions and consequence, but be absolutely focused on what you control and what you want to achieve. We cannot drift towards a threat state, and this is what it looks like on performance. What you can see here on this diagram is stress is good. I work with people in university schools. I'm trying to get to the young people today to educate them on this. I'm working with your sector on this. We have to understand that stress is good. I think sometimes the younger generations of today in particular, but generally we are catastrophizing basic human stress. We need stress to perform, but what we don't need is too much stress. So a healthy level of stress and awareness of what we're doing, and being in control. So when we are genuinely in control of what we are doing, we can hit that curve, which is the performance zone. That is the challenge state. Medium stress, high control. However, as you can see on the bottom right there, the shutdown zone, when we release too much stress and we feel too much under pressure and we feel out of control, we very quickly head for the shutdown zone. And this is known as the threat state. High stress, low control. I'm getting to leaders in your organization and I'm asking them and imploring them to think about the language they use under stress and duress. And here's the golden rule. And if there's one thing you take from my talk today, please let it be this. When you communicate with your colleagues, when someone's under pressure, when someone's having a wobble, when the chips are down, when the pressure is on, right? I want you to always communicate with people on what you would like them to do and make it instructional and offer advice, and never communicate on what we must avoid or what we must not do. We've all done it. We get so caught up in the moment that we say, listen, we cannot afford to fail this inspection. We cannot afford for this to happen. We must never have this. And when we communicate like that, we're putting ourselves and others in a threat state mindset. When we are in a threat state, we cannot be as productive as what we can in a challenge. So great leaders, great coaches, great colleagues, great friends, great parents, we always focus on what we would rather people do and how we are going to do it and what we control, even in a crisis. And that enables people to remain in what we call a challenge state mindset. Now, at this point, what I'm going to do, I'm going to talk to you about how we can connect the two things we've done already. We've talked about brain function and the chimp and why we don't deal with change very well as a result of survival, why that can overwhelm us at time. We've then talked about how that can drift into two mindsets, a challenge state mindset or a threat state mindset. Here's another interesting thing about the sequence of brain function, which we all don't do in exactly the same way, but it happens. And this is what tires us out. So I want you to think about yourself when I talk about this and what you resonate with the most. When we go to sleep in an evening, our brain drifts into the unconscious. What happens is a fluid fills in our cranium and fills the skull and starts to work its way into the brain. And the fluid is designed to clean the brain when we're asleep. So it draws all the toxins out from the day. And then when you awake, the fluid drains from the brain and it takes the toxins with it, and we get up fresh and ready to go and attack the day. It's a really clever mechanism. It's the only time when you're asleep that your brain doesn't do what I'm about to show you, because every waking moment, unless you do something and intervene, every waking moment, our brain does this sequence. Duration, path, outcome. Duration, path, outcome, duration, path, outcome, duration, path, outcome on everything from the school run to the meeting that you're about to go in at 10 o'clock this morning, to the board presentation, to what you need to do, to booking your Christmas holiday, if only, right? Everything, duration, path, outcome. And this is what your brain's doing, because it's trying to decipher what's a threat or not, given that the chimp needs to respond quick. It's saying, how long is this going to take me? What do I need to do? What's the path? And what's the outcome I need to achieve? How long is this going to take me? How am I going to achieve it or get there? And what's the outcome I need to achieve? Duration, path, outcome. Let me tell you, this pattern repeats in your brain thousands of times a day, and it's incredibly tiring, and it's what drains you unless you sleep really well and clean that brain every night. And for those of us that don't, you need to intervene throughout the day. Now, we all don't necessarily go duration, path, outcome, because driven by the way you're wired and the personality style and DNA, I'm more outcome focused. So for example, I'm more likely to go, what's the outcome I want to achieve? I don't really care about the path. The path will be the path. It'll sort itself out. But for me, it's like, how long is this going to take? Because I'm bloody impatient as hell. So it's like positive. I want to achieve a positive outcome. How long is it going to take me? And let the path be the path. Some of you out there will be really, really focused on path. It's like analytical, organized, structured. I need to know exactly what I'm doing to get to the outcome. Some of you out there will be more focused on outcome, but of a threat state nature. So you will focus on the outcomes you don't want to happen rather than want to happen. And that then puts you in that threat state. My wife is a chronic worrier, and she worries because she is constantly looking at the outcomes in the future that she doesn't want to happen. I tend to look at the outcomes that I want to make happen. Right? And we're all wonderfully different. The point I'm making is this sequence repeats thousands of times a day in your brain, and it's tiring, right? Duration, path, outcome, duration, path, outcome. And if you're one of those who has a million things flying around your brain, even into the late evening, that's sometimes what affects sleep patterns as well. So this thing constantly happens, right? This duration, path, outcome. And I'll come back to this in a short while. So knowing this, how can we better deal with pressure and change? Knowing everything we have plotted so far in this talk, how can we better deal with pressure and change? Well, let me put it all together and leave you with something that I think might be practical for you going forward over the next 3 to 6 months as we go through the winter period. We continue to battle COVID and this ever-changing environment. How can we recognize when we're drifting out of our performance zone area and try and get ourselves back in? So this is a famous theory by a psychologist in Hungary called Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. Now, I have practiced that name a number of times, so don't try it because it's impossible. But Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi created the flow state theory. And I think this is a perfect place for us to finish today, for you to understand what's happening for you and your colleagues, your family members right now in such a challenging, changing environment. The flow state theory simply states that given what I've said already about challenge and threat and the brain, etc., human beings perform primarily based on the level of challenge and pressure in a role, up that side, and along the bottom, the skill level or experience that I have to be able to deal with that challenge. So it's like, if I'm in a challenging environment, but I've got the skills and experience to tackle it, I'll be in the top right. If I'm overly challenged without the skills and experience, I'm in a different place. And if I'm overly experienced and skilled without any challenge, that can also be a problem. And this is what I'm going to reveal to you, what he understood about the different states we can be in as human beings. In the bottom left-hand corner, when we have no challenge in our role and our skill level and experience is also of a small, inadequate amount, we're in a complete state of apathy. Let's, God forbid, I don't think any of us are there, but no challenge in my life, no skills and experience, I'm just floating, I'm in apathy. However, when I've got a challenge in my life, when I find a situation quite challenging, but I still feel like I don't have the skills and experience, then I'm in a state of worry. So that threat state starts to happen, the chimp starts to become in survival mode, and I start to worry. When the challenge is high, so think about when you're really pushed outside your comfort zone, or your capacity is non-existent, or you just feel overwhelmed, it means that the challenge far outweighs my ability, my skills, my experience, my capacity to deliver against this. You can get triggered into a complete state of anxiety, which is that threat state, full threat state, driven by an overactive chimp and some cortisol release, etc. However, this is an interesting one. And I always try to say this without being childish. It's the state of arousal, right? And when I talk to clients about putting them in the state of arousal, it does make me feel childish, and a lot of people laugh with me. But listen, me, High Chick sent me, I came up with it, so I can't change the term, right? However, what this says is when the challenge is great, and I believe I have some skills and experience to pull this off, but I'm just a little bit out of my comfort zone. This is the perfect incubator for growth. People who put themselves in the state of arousal where I'm going to rise to the challenge, even though I don't feel like I've got all the skills and experience yet. That's where you develop the skills and experience to push on in the top right-hand corner. So it's the ultimate incubator for growth. Coming down the bottom, what happens when we've got skill levels and experience and traits in some fashion, but again, you know, no challenge in the job. So I feel like I'm capable and I can contribute, but I've got no challenge. Well, I go into a complete state of boredom. Now, some people in COVID have not always gone to the top left-hand corner. Some people in COVID have gone right down here where they've been highly active, they've been in a pivotal role, and they've been asked to go on furlough or work from home or change their jobs, and they're not challenged. And that is a problem for these type of people, me included. I struggled with the first lockdown through boredom and being in relaxation when I need to be up in arousal and flow a lot to be able to get fulfillment. Relaxation is a little bit further along. There's a little bit of challenge, but I'm so highly skilled that I can do it with my eyes closed. Control is an interesting one. That is, I am highly skilled and experienced. I've got a little bit of challenge, so I'm in complete control, and actually being in this zone for a period of time is not bad in terms of managing those stress levels. And top right-hand corner, of course, the state of flow. What me, High Chick Sent Me High found was that human beings are most productive and capable in the state of flow when that challenge state is met. And that means that, you know, it's the only way to describe it is that, have you ever been working for 4 hours and time has gone like that? You haven't even eaten. You look up at the clock and you think, whoa, because you're in your state of flow. You've been working on a project or buried in something that's giving you fulfillment. Your juices are flowing. You're challenged. You're enjoying it. And that's called a state of flow. Sportsmen and women describe this as 30 minutes has gone by. They've won the championship and they don't know how they did it. Time stood still. And it's called our state of flow. For many people in high pressurized operations, they'll be in the top right-hand corner quite a lot. And that's where we get performance from. But here's the key thing. Top right-hand corner is good in challenging environments. We want yourselves and your people in arousal, flow, or control. We want a high degree of challenge or a good degree of challenge, but we also want to be meeting that with calmness and composure. What we don't want is people in anxiety, worry, or apathy, or boredom in particular. Relaxation will come to in a second. We don't want people in there constantly, but we certainly don't want people in these other states. I want you to think about yourself right now and your colleagues. Over the past 6 to 9 months, have you been sort of thrust across to anxiety and worry where you feel overwhelmed, over-challenged, over-worried, and unable to deal with that? Or have you actually been in too much boredom and apathy and relaxation where you want more challenge and you want more intensity in what you do? Either way, what I'm observing in healthcare organizations and trusts at the minute is this. We need to, as leaders, as influential people, we need to look out for ourselves and our colleagues, and we need to reverse transition back into the top right-hand corner. If we feel like somebody is spending too long in anxiety and worry, we need to help them. If somebody is spending too long in relaxation or boredom and they're not getting that purpose and fulfillment, we need to reverse engineer and help them and at least get them back into arousal or control. And the way to do that is this, and this is the second salient point. So if there's a second thing you take from my talk, let it be this. The biggest mistake we make in organizations is this. If somebody is in anxiety and worry and they feel overwhelmed and over-challenged, we step in and we do it for them, or we give their duties to somebody else, therefore reducing the challenge. So we mean well, but we reduce the challenge. That only does one thing in psychology. It grows the gremlin that this person cannot do what you was asking them to do. So when they return to try and do it, the fear is even greater, the anxiety is even greater, right? On relaxation and boredom, sometimes we ask highly skilled people and highly motivated by pressure people to sit and do very little for a period of time. That is equally as damaging. So we can't ask them to sit there. Instead, what we must always do is never reduce the challenge for people in anxiety or worry. We must always try to work with them and increase the skills and the traits and the characteristics to deal with it and push them into arousal. Try to never decrease the challenge. Always support them to move across. And for people in boredom and relaxation, never ask them to sit there for long periods of time, not having purpose and fulfilling themselves. We need to increase the challenge. We need to give them a new project, get them involved in something. We need to increase the challenge so they don't sit there in relaxation and boredom. And that's how we're going to reverse transition people into it. Now, with a couple of minutes left, I'm going to make my final point. I'm going to bring it all together and make my final point because this is important. And then you can grill me and ask me any questions. Relaxation is important. What many studies have found is that to break duration path outcome, I mentioned that you can only not do duration path outcome fully when you're asleep. Well, you can break the intensity of duration path outcome when we are awake. And the only way to do that is to be completely present in the moment on a single activity. It is scientifically impossible to focus on something in the future when you are completely immersed in the present. Your brain can't do those two functions together. So whatever it is for you throughout the working day as a healthcare sector worker, this is arguably the biggest opportunity that we have. You have to find, if you want to keep going in the top right-hand corner of arousal, flow and control, if we do need to retract from that, we have to find 3 or 4 times, 3 or 4 points throughout the day where you can come out of that into relaxation. And the only way to do that is to be present. Whether you go for a walk, whether you listen to a podcast, whether you read a book, whatever it is that brings you to the present to stop your brain doing duration path outcome on the future. For just 10 minutes, it is scientifically proven that it has restorative effects on our ability to go back again and focus. Have you ever been at your desk for a long period of time in flow? And then all of a sudden everything goes hazy and you just can't focus. So you go away, you make a cup of tea, you have your lunch, you chat to your children, you listen to a podcast, you watch a TED talk, you do something, and then you come back half an hour later and you go, right, where was I? And you're able to go again. It's because the brain needs to be able to fluctuate from intense periods of focus and concentration in arousal state and flow, but it needs those bits of respite where it can just start to restore and cut off duration path outcome for a short period of time. So it's so important in your working life that you find this. Whether you're working from home, sometimes you're overcompensating by sitting at your PC for 9 hours, right? You need to equally move yourself away into relaxation for short periods to break duration path outcome. If you're on a 12-hour shift down a ward, it's even sometimes impossible to do this, but the restorative effects are amazing. If we've got a fighting chance of not pendulum the other way into anxiety and worry and back into flow and anxiety and worry, we need to pendulum through the bottom way through to relaxation and back up. We need to find space in our working day to break duration path outcome. And whatever that is for you, it is for you. For me, it's golf, right? I can't always go and have a 4-hour round of golf every day. But when I am playing golf, it is the only 4 hours in my life where I look at a little white ball and walk around the course and I don't think about anything else, work, family, anything. It's the way I break duration path outcome and restore my energy levels to go again. What is it for you? Just 10 minutes, 3 or 4 times a day will make a huge difference. And if you recognize your colleagues going from anxiety and worry into the top right corner, intervene. Let's help them. Let's get them, give them a break. Let's get them to focus on the present and break that never-ending duration path outcome, which can tire us so much every single day. So with that and in summary, and I'm just going to come out of this and then come back into the session and I'll gladly take any questions in a second. I'll stop sharing. Think about your chimps. Think about managing your chimps. Think about being in a challenge state and not a threat state. Think about that flow state theory. Help yourselves out, help your colleagues out, and hopefully that is enough for us to navigate the next 3 to 6 months. So thank you very much, Julia. I don't know if it was after the little blip, if the audio and everything was okay, but cool. I'll take any questions, Julia.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I'm going to start with some reflections first, Martin. First of all, thank you so much for that. That was a great talk and a great kickoff, I think, for day 2 of the conference. So thank you. And thank you, everyone, for bearing with us when the tech went down. Now, the first thing I wanted to tell you, Martin, is that you were definitely #1 on the first impressions.
Thank you.
So congratulations. There's a stream of that in the chat. So I'm going to ask you the first question on first impressions, actually, which is a classic coaching question I ask my clients. Could you, in 3 words, please describe your personal brand.
Oh, very loud.
Say it.
So I'm loud, number one. I'm very loud and expressive. I've nicked 2 words there into one. Loud and expressive. Driven, impatient. And I don't mind admitting that one.
No, that's great. All right. Well, thank you very much, Martin. I thought I'd just check in with you on that because, as I say, it's a classic coaching question. And maybe everyone, you can have a think about what your personal brand is, seeing that we're actually talking about first impressions today. Some of the other comments I've got is hashtag breaks reduce mistakes. I like that one. So having that sort of time out that you talked about as part of the flow control relaxation. So some thoughts on that. So Sarah James made a comment. We need to position change so that it doesn't threaten the chimp. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. We do. And you know, I make some provocative comments to the healthcare sector about the language we use in healthcare that can easily send us into the threat state. What it's not saying to that amazing point is that change is bad. We've got to have an eye on consequence. We've got to have an eye that we've got to challenge the status quo. We've got to demand to be better and better. And we've got to drive performance in the healthcare sector. That should never go away. However, we've got to be able to make it non-threatening with the language we use, the positioning we use. We've got to always be focused on the solution and what we can do, rather than on what we must never do or what's not so good or what's going wrong. And that will then engage and galvanize our people in the sector together, so they won't be so fearful of making mistakes. They will be more focused on execution and getting stuff right. And I think if we can make that subtle change, rather than everybody having their shield up and trying to defend and not go wrong, I think that would be a wonderful thing. But it's bigger than the sum of its parts. It's going to take an industry to talk about this. And that's why we're very much partnering at the moment with many organisations to bang the drum on challenge and threat state.
Thank you very much, Martin. Fantastic. Sorry, just getting a bit of feedback there. Just see if there's still feedback. No, that's gone. Okay, thank you very much. I guess Rachel probably pressed the magic button at that point. So the golf analogy, I think, is really important, and that resonated with me because during lockdown, the swimming pools have been closed, and I find that I do a faster, better stroke when I'm in a positive mindset. And I was a competitive swimmer some years ago. But I also find that when I'm in a negative mindset, my stroke is terrible and I'm all over the place. Speed can go up because of the adrenaline if I'm really angry about something. And so I can go even faster under threat. But that's obviously you work a lot with sports colleagues as well, but those breaks and the time that you give yourself to think through and that relaxation would then help you with your flow as well.
And Julia, I just want to reiterate that for anybody who's who understands this, is that it's a scientific physical thing. When we release cortisol into the brain, it's designed, so years ago, it's designed to get you tunnel visioned on the threat and move, right? So when we are releasing cortisol through threat state thinking and the fear of consequence and stress, our fine motor skills reduce, which means you can't swim as well as you can. I can't play golf as relaxed as I can. We can't conduct an operation in a theatre as good as we can, because it's a physicality thing. That means it tightens your body, it reduces your fine motor skills so you can focus on the threat. So that's why I implore people to be in a challenge state and not a threat state.
Thank you, Martin. I'm just looking at the chat because a lot of people are, if you just bear with me. So I've got, somebody mentions yoga, which I think is really important. I try and do that every morning myself. That's just to get my old bones working. Classic perform and recover cycle. Really liked your athlete analogy. Really interesting presentation, says Amelia. But interesting to see the challenging capacity link. Fascinating, informative, really interesting and thought-provoking, brilliant session. So appropriate at this stressful time. Very interesting session. Thank you so much. Great to start a Wednesday morning with this session. So thank you. There we go. Stimulating combined with humour. That's what we need more of, Martin. So thank you for that. Just seeing, there's lots of chat, so I'm just going down to see if there's anything else.
Interesting. Just while you're doing that, Julia, someone mentioned capacity. Now, I do want to acknowledge this for the healthcare sector. In that four-state theory model, it's sometimes not about skills and experience and having the right skills, traits, and experience. Some people have it, but they just don't have the capacity, which will equally put them in the top left, the worry and anxiety box. Now, there's no silver bullet to that because you can't stop the juggernaut that is the NHS operation or the healthcare sector operation. But the only way out of it for people is to create capacity, to move back over into arousal and flow. And however we do that, as a team, together, we've got to be able to do that, create the capacity to move back over. It's easier said than done in your sector. So I do want to acknowledge that point, that capacity can easily send you up there as much as a lack of experience and skills.
Sure, no, thank you. And that's much appreciated, especially given the last year or so. I've just managed to get down to the bottom of the loads of chat, as I say, and loads of really positive remarks. I'll just make this statement, and then I think I've got a couple of questions just to finish off with, I think. This is so good. Thank you, Martin. Lots of ideas flowing in my brain right now on how to apply this in practice. Line managers will really benefit from the understanding of the brain sequence and how to best support their staff. Simple things like ensuring staff take their regular breaks and holidays. As you say, it's about the capacity.
Can I just mention one thing on that, Julia? Great point, Matt. Duration path outcome is slightly different for different people. The way I coach people and what we're working with leaders in the NHS on is you can have a conversation with any colleague about what they're worrying about, what they're overwhelmed with, and you can narrow it down to they feel they don't have enough time, duration, they don't know what to do, the path, or they're focused on the outcome of a negative nature. They're worried about the consequence. Once you understand which part of duration path outcome they're being overwhelmed by, you can then effectively have a conversation with them about how we can deal with that. So it's a really easy mechanism to start driving conversations with overwhelmed colleagues.
That's really helpful, Martin. Thank you very much for that. There is a question here, which is very interesting. Claire thanks you for your presentation and asks, what advice do you have for individuals and leaders who find themselves in the shutdown zone?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a zone where it's not very sustainable for very long before something gives. So it's absolutely imperative. Now, if you look at the two axes of the reason why they're in the shutdown zone, either they're too much stress or they feel out of control. So the way to deal with that is you need to retract a little bit of the stress by increasing the control. Now, the only way for a human being to ever increase control is to make decisions and take actions. When we start to make some decisions and take some actions, we feel back in control, because after all, there is nothing more powerful than a decided mind. When we are undecided and we are procrastinating, we feel out of control and we're down here. So I always say to my wife, whatever you're worried about, let's wrestle back some control to the now. What decisions are we going to make and what actions can we take to alleviate what you're worrying about? Within 3 conversations and 3 decisions that lead to action, you take a breath and you feel back in control. Just always remember that there is nothing more powerful than a decided mind. So I would say you've got to wrestle back control to release the stress by making decisions and taking actions.
Martin, that's really good advice. Thank you for that. Karen and Diana have both got questions. I think what I'll do is I'll go to Diana's first because it links with what you're talking about. Could you give an example of how to move from anxiety to flow when there's little capacity?
Oh, that is probably the hardest question you could ever throw at me, right? At the end of the day, moving from anxiety, yeah, absolutely. Moving from anxiety to flow, straight to flow, is probably a big ask. What I would rather do is move from anxiety to arousal. So let's at least get to the point where we don't feel like the whole problem is fixed, but I feel like I can cope. Does that make sense? So it's like, at this point, I feel like it's completely untenable and unmanageable. I just need to feel like I can cope with it first before I feel fully back in control. So the way to do that, and it's harder in the healthcare sector than most of the sectors, unless you work for any other service, is you have to free up capacity. I always challenge in the healthcare and trust leaders to work with their people on the power of three. Now, the power of three is the notion that we humans can't focus on more than three things at any one time and no more than one thing in any one moment. Those who think they can multitask are kidding themselves, because it's the way our brain functions. So the power of three says, let's take the capacity issue and chunk it up into threes. What do we need to do first? What's the three most important things? Then we can take these three, then we can take these three. When we work on the power of three, it's like your to-do list. If you write a to-do list and you nail it, you go home in the car feeling like you can actually take on the weekend, right? When you don't nail your to-do list and you've added to it and you sit in your car and think, what the hell have I done today? You feel completely overwhelmed with anxiety. So there's no silver bullet to this, but if this answers your question, think first step, I need to cope. To cope, I need to be in arousal. To do that, I need to chop up my capacity issue into shorter chunks, and I need to focus on the power of three and systematically work through them in a challenge state. And if I can do that, I will take baby steps towards freeing myself up. And do you know what the challenge of that is, Julia? If more stuff's coming over the fence, that's the problem.
Yeah.
At some point, you've got to be prepared to say no, as long as you can explain why. And you need your leaders to back you on saying no. You know, that's my answer to it.
Absolutely. I have a great book, which I'm just going to show everybody. Managing Up. Okay, that's another that I give to my coaching clients, another book. So I'm sorry, Karen, we're going to run out of time now, so we can't ask your question, but thank you for it. Martin, thank you so much for a fabulous talk. As you will see in the chat later, you know, when you come off screen, it's been incredibly positive, and I want to thank you very much for a fascinating session, first thing on a Wednesday morning and our opening for day 2. So Martin, thank you very much for everyone.
Thank you, Julia. And if anybody wants to know more about Claire's, we've got the T2 booth. So Claire's manning that all day. So if you want to register your interest and know what we're doing, we'd be glad to help you out.
Thank you, Martin. That's fantastic. And I was just going to say that we're now going into a break. Please do visit the exhibition booths. Go to Martin's booth and others. Grab yourself a cuppa. Stretch out. I'm certainly going to be doing a bit of a walk and a bit of a stomp just to get myself moving again. And please do join in the networking as well. For both the exhibitors and the delegates and participants. Please can I ask everybody to come back to the main stage at 11:30, where we'll be hearing from Shirley Rogers. Thank you very much.